A girl, a tattered notebook, and a brilliant mind. She knew that at school, more than learning, she needed to persevere. When they laughed at her for being poor, she responded with knowledge. Now even her teacher has to admit, sometimes the greatest lesson comes from those they least expect. In the courtyard of the Zumbi dos Palmares Municipal School, located in the Calabar neighborhood, a community nestled between affluent areas of the capital of Bahia, 8-year-old Yasmin Alves dos Santos, a girl with braids adorned with colorful beads, held her mother Donna Jurema's hand tightly as they walked through the entrance gate. "Remember what we talked about, my daughter." Donna Jurema adjusted Yasmin's worn-out uniform, a hand-me-down from an older cousin. "What you learn here no one can take away from you. It's more valuable than anything expensive others might have." Yasmin nodded with a shy smile. Her large, expressive eyes revealed an intelligence that contrasted with her fragile appearance. The patched-up backpack she carried hid borrowed books from the community library, her true passion. Donna Jurema worked as a housekeeper in one of the luxurious apartments on Ocean Avenue. She left home before sunrise and returned after nightfall. Yasmin's father, Mr. Antonio, was a construction worker who spent weeks away on distant job sites. Despite their hardships, both parents made a point of encouraging their daughter's education. In the classroom, Yasmin sat at the back, not by choice, but because that was where her teacher, Ms. Renata Cavalcanti, had placed her on the first day of school. The girl observed everything attentively, absorbing every word, every new concept, like a sponge thirsty for knowledge. The other children showed off new notebooks, pencil cases filled with colorful markers, and lunchboxes decorated with cartoon characters. Yasmin had only a worn hardcover notebook, a few sharpened pencils, and a handmade pencil case made by her mother from fabric scraps. Her lunch was wrapped in reused aluminum foil. "Teacher, Yasmin is wearing the same uniform as last week," shouted Pedro Henrique, the son of the owner of the city's largest car dealership. The classroom erupted in laughter as Yasmin sank into her chair, wishing she could disappear. "Miss." Renata pretended not to hear. At 43 years old and with 22 years of teaching experience, she had grown accustomed to ignoring certain situations. Things have always been this way, she thought, as she wrote the day's lesson topic on the board: Great Brazilian Writers. "Who can name some famous writers from our literature?" asked Ms. Renata, adjusting her thin-framed glasses. Eager. Hands shot up. Pedro Henrique was the first to speak. "Machado de Assis," he exclaimed proudly. "My dad has a special edition of Dom Casmurro on the living room shelf." "Very good, Pedro," praised the teacher. "Who else?" "Clarice Lispector," answered Sophia, a girl with straight hair and designer clothes. "Carlos Drummond de Andrade," said Lucas, sitting in the front row. Yasmin took a deep breath and, gathering all her courage, raised her hand. Ms. Renata, after scanning the room, finally noticed her. "Yes, Yasmin, do you know any writers?" Before she could answer, Pedro Henrique turned around and let out a mocking laugh. "I doubt you know any. I bet you don't even have books at home." Laughter echoed through the room again. Ms. Renata gave Pedro a silent, disapproving look, but didn't intervene. Yasmin felt her heart tighten, but she remembered her mother's words that morning. She lifted her chin and, in a clear voice, began to speak. "Miss Renata, I know many authors, but today I want to talk about Conceição Evaristo." A surprised silence filled the room. Even Miss Renata seemed taken aback. "She wrote about black women, about resistance, about the hard lives and struggles of people like my mother," Yasmin continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "She said our writing, our history are made of escrevivencias, life writings." The silence in the classroom was palpable. Pedro Henrique's mouth hung open, unable to come up with a retort. Ms. Renata felt a lump growing in her throat. "I may not have the prettiest notebooks," Yasmin went on, "but my mother taught me that what I learn no one can take away from me. I read because I want to change my future, and one day, when I'm a writer, I don't want any black child to go through what I went through here today." Ms. Renata tried to speak, but the words escaped her. For the first time in many years, she truly saw a student beyond her own prejudices. What she saw was a determined, intelligent, and courageous child who, despite all adversities, remained steadfast in her desire to learn. The bell for recess rang, breaking the reflective moment. The children quickly left, leaving Yasmin alone, carefully organizing her materials. Ms. Renata hesitantly approached her. "Where did you learn about Conceição Evaristo's work, Yasmin?" "At the community library in our neighborhood, Ms. Renata. Ms. Zuleika, the librarian, helps me choose books. She says I have the eyes of someone who will go far." Renata felt the weight of her own complicit silence in the face of the teasing Yasmin endured. How many times had she stayed silent? How many times had she perpetuated, through her indifference, the cycle of exclusion that marked the lives of students like Yasmin? In the schoolyard, while the other children played, Yasmin sat under the shade of a large mango tree, opening a worn book from the community library. She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice Ms. Renata approaching again, watching her with a mix of admiration and shame. At that moment, something shifted in Ms. Renata Cavalcanti's heart, a spark of transformation that, though she didn't yet realize it, would change not only her way of teaching, but also the destiny of Yasmin and many other children who would cross her path. 3 days had passed since the incident in the classroom. Ms. Renata couldn't forget Yasmin's words. Sitting in her small apartment in the Graça neighborhood, she flipped through a copy of Becos da Memoria by Conceição Evaristo, which she had bought the day before. How does an 8-year-old know this literature, when I, a teacher for over 20 years, barely knew of its existence? Renata wondered as she sipped her solitary breakfast coffee. Renata had followed a career marked by conformity. The daughter of traditional teachers, she had taken the expected path, accepting social hierarchies as immutable truths. Without realizing it, she had become part of the system that perpetuated inequalities. That morning, as she arrived at school, her eyes caught details she had previously ignored. The faded uniforms of some students, the patched-up backpacks, the downcast looks of those who, like Yasmin, came from realities very different from Pedro Henrique and his friends. When she entered the classroom, she found Yasmin already seated, absorbed in reading a book. She approached quietly. "Good morning, Yasmin. What book are you reading?" The girl looked up, surprised by the teacher's unusual attention. "It's The Little Prince, Miss Renata. Miss Zuleika said there's a part about seeing with the heart." Renata smiled, feeling a pang of emotion. "You know, Yasmin, I've been thinking a lot about what you said about Conceição Evaristo. In fact, I bought one of her books." Yasmin's eyes lit up. "You'll like it. My mother says she writes with the soul of the women who came before her." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the other students. Pedro Henrique entered noisily, showing off his new handheld video game. Renata took a deep breath, making a decision that would change the course of her classes. "Good morning, class. Today we're starting a special project. I want each of you to tell me about a writer you admire and why." Pedro Henrique immediately raised his hand. "Can I talk about Shakespeare? My dad says he's the greatest of all." "Of course, Pedro," Renata replied, "but I'd like everyone to also discover Brazilian writers, especially those we don't usually hear about in traditional classes." "Like who, Ms. Renata?" asked Sofia, twisting a strand of hair. "Like Carolina Maria de Jesus, Lima Barreto, Maria Firmina dos Reis, Conceição Evaristo. There are many important names we need to know." Yasmin's eyes sparkled with each name mentioned. For the first time, she felt her teacher was talking about a world that also belonged to her. At the end of the school day, Renata surprised everyone by heading to the Calabar Community Library. She needed to meet this Ms. Zuleika, who inspired Yasmin. The library operated in an old 2-room house, with walls painted in vibrant colors. Books organized on makeshift shelves filled every available space. In the center, a black woman with graying hair and colorful glasses was guiding a group of children. "Ms. Zuleika?" Renata called timidly. The woman looked up, studying the visitor with curiosity. "That's me. How can I help you?" "I'm Renata Cavalcanti, Yasmin Alves's teacher." Zuleika's face lit up. "Ah, our little Yasmin, a special girl, isn't she? She has a hunger for knowledge like few I've seen. Yes, she's impressive, Renata agreed. She mentioned writers that I admit some I barely knew. Zuleika smiled, indicating a chair for Renata to sit. Yasmin spends hours here after school, waiting for her mother to return from work. She's already read almost our entire children's section and is now exploring other genres. She told me about Conceição Evaristo. Yes, she found the book on her own on the shelf and was enchanted. She said the stories seemed to speak about people she knew. Renata felt a mix of admiration and shame. For how long had she underestimated students like Yasmin? Mrs. Zuleika, I'd like to propose something. I'm planning a project on diverse Brazilian literature with my class. Would a partnership with the library be possible? The librarian's eyes sparkled. Of course, we have a modest collection, but it's rich in voices that are usually silenced. In the days that followed, Renata transformed her classroom. Students were divided into mixed groups, where those with more resources sat alongside those with less. Yasmin, once isolated at the back, now occupied a seat at the front, next to Pedro Henrique. The initial resistance turned into curiosity. Pedro, used to being the center of attention for his material possessions, discovered that Yasmin knew stories he had never heard. Sophia began bringing her books to share, while Lucas became fascinated with the Cordell pamphlets that Mr. Antonio, Yasmin's father, sent to the school when he learned about the project. Donna Jurema, upon hearing about the change, visited the school for the first time. Having worked as a housekeeper since she was 13, she had never imagined her daughter could be a standout in the classroom. Ms. Renata, she said, her eyes brimming with tears, you can't imagine what it means for Yasmin to be heard. At home, she won't stop talking about the books, about her new friends. Renata held Jurema's calloused hands. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Your daughter has taught me more than years of college ever did. The project extended beyond the school walls. Parents began visiting the community library, bringing their children. Ms. Zuleika, always smiling, welcomed everyone with the same attention. Even Pedro Henrique's parents, initially reluctant, ended up visiting the space after their son's insistence. Ricardo Almeida, the car dealership owner, was surprised to find rare works in the small collection. My dad has a huge library at home, Pedro told Yasmin during recess, but he said he found books here he'd never seen before. Yasmin smiled. Ms. Zuleika says books are like people. It doesn't matter where they come from. They all have important stories to tell. The phrase, spoken with the simplicity of an 8-year-old, echoed through the school hallways and parent meetings. Renata, witnessing the gradual transformation, felt part of something greater than herself. One afternoon, while organizing donated books for the literary fair she was planning, Renata found an old photo in her drawer. It was her at 8 years, old, smiling timidly, holding a book. She had completely forgotten that dreamy girl who once wanted to change the world through education. How could I have lost myself so much along the way? She asked herself, tucking the photo into her bag. That night, by the window of her apartment, Renata began writing a journal. On the first page, she wrote, "Thank you, Yasmin, for reminding me of who I really am." 20 years had passed since that transformative day at the Zumbi dos Palmares Municipal School. The small community library in Calabar had expanded, now occupying a 2-story building on the same street. On the exterior walls, a colorful mural depicted black figures from Brazilian literature, and in the center, a phrase in golden letters, "Our writing, our history are made of escrevivencias." Young woman with braids adorned with golden threads and a vibrant yellow dress watched students entering the building. Yasmin Alves dos Santos, now 28, had become a renowned writer and had just released her 3rd book, a collection of short stories inspired by her childhood in Calabar. "Are you nervous?" asked Ms. Zuleika, now with completely white hair but the same lively gaze from 2 decades ago. "A little," Yasmin admitted, adjusting the colorful bead necklace that had belonged to her mother, Donna Jurema, who had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before seeing her daughter graduate with a degree in literature from the Federal University of Bahia. "Your mother would be so proud," Zuleika said, squeezing Yasmin's arm affectionately. "And your father?" "Dad's on his way. He said not even a hurricane could keep him from being here today." The library's interior was decorated for the occasion. Chairs arranged in a semicircle, a table with copies of the new book, and on the walls, photographs of the library's history, many of them showing Yasmin growing up among those shelves. Guests began to arrive. Former classmates, university professors, Calabar residents. Mr. Antonio, Yasmin's father, entered with his new wife, Donna Sida, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. His eyes shone with emotion as he saw his daughter standing confidently, ready to present her work to the world. "My daughter," he hugged her tightly. "Every brick I laid in life was worth it for this moment." Among the last to arrive was a woman with impeccably styled grey hair. Renata Cavalcanti, now the principal of the school where it all began, carried a carefully wrapped package. "Ms. Renata," Yasmin greeted her with a tight hug. "I'm so glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it for anything, my dear," Renata replied, handing her the package. "Open it later." The library was packed when Yasmin took her place at the table. Beside her stood a tall man with discreet glasses, Pedro Henrique, her former classmate and now the editor of her collection. Their paths had crossed again years later when Pedro, impressed by a short story Yasmin had published in a university newspaper, sought her out to offer a contract with the publishing house he had inherited from his father. "Good evening, everyone," Yasmin began, her firm voice echoing through the silent room. "It's with immense joy that I share with you Alleys and Dreams, my new collection of short stories. This book is a celebration of the voices that have always been here but were long unheard." Yasmin's eyes scanned the audience until they met Renata's. They shared a knowing smile, both remembering that distant morning that had changed their lives. "I'd like to start by reading the story that gives the book its title. It's about a girl who discovers the power of words and a teacher who, through her, rediscovers her own voice." A murmur of approval swept through the room. Renata felt a lump in her throat, immediately recognizing the inspiration for the narrative. After the reading, as she signed copies and chatted with guests, Yasmin was surprised by a familiar face. Sophia, her former classmate, now a doctor at the university hospital, approached shyly. "Your book is wonderful, Yasmin. That girl in the story, it's all of us, in a way, isn't it?" "It's all of us seeking to be heard," Yasmin agreed. When the event ended, only a small group remained. Zuleika, Renata, Pedro Henrique, Mr. Antonio, and Donna Sida. Sitting in a circle, as in the early days of the library's first book club, they shared memories and plans for the future. "Remember, when we organized the school's first literary fair?" asked Pedro Henrique, now a sensitive and conscious man, very different from the arrogant boy he had been. "How could I forget?" Renata smiled. "It was the first time I saw students from all social classes working together, truly learning from one another." Yasmin finally opened the package Renata had given her. Inside was an old handmade notebook. "My journal," Renata explained. "I started writing it that night, after your lesson on Conceição Evaristo. I thought it might inspire your next book." Yasmin flipped through the first pages, moved by her former teacher's reflections. "Thank you, Yasmin, for reminding me of who I really am." "I think we all owe each other thanks," said Zuleika, raising her teacup in a toast. "Life is this, a web of stories that intersect and transform." 2 days later, Yasmin was invited to speak to the students at the Zumbi dos Palmares Municipal School. As she entered the now renovated and colorful building, she felt an indescribable emotion. On the walls were student works on Afro-Brazilian literature. In the school library, photos of the writers studied, including Yasmin herself. As she entered the classroom, she was met by 25 pairs of curious eyes, children from different backgrounds, all wearing the same uniform but each carrying their own unique stories. At the back of the room, a girl with colorful braids timidly raised her hand. "Ms. Yasmin, is it true that you studied at this same school?" "Yes, it's true," Yasmin confirmed, walking closer to the girl. "And what's your name?" "Jurema," the little girl replied. "Like your mother, our teacher told us your story." Yasmin felt her heart warm. She glanced at Renata, who was watching from the doorway with tears in her eyes. "Jurema, do you like to read?" The girl nodded energetically. "I love it. I'm reading a book about a girl who wanted to be a writer." Yasmin smiled, recognizing, in Jurema's words, the echo of her own past and the promise of a different future for so many other children. "Did you know that stories are like seeds?" Yasmin asked the class. "We plant them in our minds, water them with our imagination, and they grow, blossom, and produce new seeds. What do we do with those new seeds?" asked a boy in the front row. Yasmin looked at Renata before answering, both sharing the certainty that the cycle of transformation would continue. "We share them with the world," Yasmin replied, "so that other stories can be born." At the end of the visit, Yasmin stood by one of the school windows observing the courtyard. Children ran, played, and discussed ideas. Under the same sprawling mango tree where she used to read, a small group now sat in a reading circle. "The circle is complete," Renata said, joining her in contemplation. "But it never really ends, does it?" Yasmin nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon of Salvador, where the sun set in golden hues over the sea, heralding new dawns and new stories yet to come. That afternoon, at the Zumbi dos Palmares Municipal School, was just the beginning of a long journey. Yasmin continued to visit schools across Brazil, carrying her message of hope and transformation through literature. Her fourth book, inspired by Renata's journal, became a national success and was adopted as required reading in several universities. Pedro Henrique expanded the publishing house he inherited from his father, creating a collection dedicated to new authors from marginalized communities. Sophia established a reading incentive program at the hospital where she worked, believing in the therapeutic power of words. The Calabar Library, under the guidance of Ms. Zuleika and later her apprentices, became a model of cultural resistance and social transformation, replicated in other communities across the country. And little Jurema. She grew up hearing the stories of her namesake, carrying with her the legacy of strength and determination that had inspired Yasmin. One day, she too would write her own story, continuing the cycle of transformation that a simple lesson about literature had set in motion. Because, as Yasmin always said in her talks, no one is born knowing all the stories in the world, but everyone is born with the right to tell them and to hear them. Dear listeners, we hope Yasmin and Renata's journey has touched your hearts as much as it has touched ours. To continue this voyage through stories that transform lives, we've prepared a special playlist of equally moving and inspiring narratives. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story about the transformative power of education and literature resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the human capacity for overcoming challenges. Share in the comments your own experiences with teachers who made a difference in your life or books that changed your perspective. Your story deserves to be heard too. We'll be back tomorrow with another emotional tale. Until then,